Katherine Moore sensed something breaking long before she found proof. Jonathan Reed, once attentive and affectionate, had become distant, staying out late with excuses that no longer aligned with reality. The man who used to share every detail of his day suddenly guarded his phone, like it held his life inside it. Their conversations became shallow, their laughter faded, and the warmth of their home slowly drained into an uncomfortable silence. Katherine tried to convince herself it was work stress, but a quiet ache in her chest told her the truth. Something was deeply wrong. One evening, Jonathan returned home smelling of a floral perfume Katherine had never worn. He avoided her eyes, muttered a rushed excuse, and went straight to the shower. Katherine stood alone in the living room, her heart sinking. She didn't argue, didn't question, because she already knew. She simply watched his retreating figure and realized that the man she married was slipping away, and she had no idea how far he'd already gone. The truth landed in Katherine's hands by accident. A forgotten jacket on the sofa, a phone but she wasn't supposed to hear, and a message preview that shattered everything. "I can't wait to see you again. Love you, Emily." Katherine froze. The name, the tone, the intimacy, there was no misinterpretation. Jonathan wasn't just cheating. He was emotionally invested. Her hands trembled, but her mind sharpened with a calmness she didn't expect. She didn't cry, didn't shout. She simply breathed deeply and accepted the reality she could no longer deny. That night, she lay beside Jonathan pretending to sleep, listening as he whispered on the phone in the hallway, telling Emily he missed her. Katherine felt a coldness settle in her chest, but not anger, clarity. She realized that confronting him now would only give him control over the narrative. Instead, she turned her back to him, eyes open in the dark, already planning her next steps. If he wanted betrayal, she would give him truth, but on her terms. Katherine's quiet investigation led her to Emily Carter, a young woman who worked near Jonathan's office. Emily was beautiful, confident, and clearly unaware of the ripples she was creating. Katherine watched them once from a distance as they laughed outside a cafe, Jonathan holding Emily's waist like he once held hers. It should have broken her, but instead it solidified her resolve. She refused to let her emotions drive her decisions. She would reclaim control with grace and precision. When Katherine later learned Emily was pregnant, the final puzzle piece fell into place. Jonathan wasn't just unfaithful. He was building a second life. Katherine stared at the ultrasound photo Jonathan left carelessly on his desk, feeling a strange mix of numbness and power. If this was the life he chose, she would not stand in the shadows crying. She would face this betrayal head-on, but with a strategy he would never see coming. While Jonathan continued lying, Katherine started moving in silence. She requested a discreet transfer to a different hospital, the same one where Emily was registered for antenatal care. Her reputation as a skilled midwife made the transfer effortless. No one questioned her motives. She simply seemed like a dedicated professional seeking growth. Inside, she was preparing for the moment fate would bring Jonathan face to face with the consequences of his choices. Every day at her new hospital, Katherine saw Emily's name in the system, Emily Carter Reed, using Jonathan's surname unofficially. Katherine studied her medical records not out of malice, but preparation. She wanted no surprises when the moment came. The betrayal still hurt, but it no longer controlled her. She walked through the halls with calm determination, knowing that her silence was becoming her strongest weapon. Jonathan thought he was hiding a secret. He had no idea she was building an ending he would never forget. Emily's pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Katherine oversaw her file with icy professionalism. Emily had no idea the senior midwife monitoring her was the wife of the man she loved. Jonathan attended appointments occasionally, unaware that Katherine watched him from behind frosted observation windows. Every time she saw him hold Emily's hand, Katherine felt a deep ache, but not weakness. It was the ache of someone who had already decided to rise above humiliation. Jonathan, meanwhile, believed he was in complete control. He had no clue Katherine knew everything. His double life continued, romantic dinners with Emily, lies told to Katherine. But Katherine had stopped expecting honesty from him. She stopped waiting for explanations or apologies. She focused on the moment that was coming, the moment he would walk into the labor room with Emily and find his own wife waiting as the senior midwife. That day would mark the end of their marriage and the beginning of her freedom. It happened on a rainy evening. Emily went into labor earlier than expected, and Jonathan rushed her into the hospital in a panic. Katherine received a call from the nursing desk. Senior midwife Moore, urgent labor case coming in. Her heart tightened, but her face remained expressionless. She prepared the room, laid out the instruments, and waited. Every step she took felt like reclaiming a piece of herself that Jonathan had tried to break. When the doors burst open and Jonathan rushed in holding Emily's hand, Katherine didn't flinch. She wore her mask, her hair tucked neatly, her uniform pristine. Jonathan didn't recognize her immediately, not until she stepped forward to take control. His eyes widened, his face drained of color, and time froze. Emily winced in pain, unaware of the storm brewing around her. Katherine simply said, "Let's begin," her voice calm and professional. She refused to give him a single emotion. The labor was intense, but Katherine handled it with flawless precision. She guided Emily through contractions, monitored her vitals, and ignored Jonathan's trembling presence in the corner. Emily never suspected who Katherine truly was. She only saw a skilled, calm professional ensuring her safety. Jonathan, however, could barely breathe. He kept staring at Katherine, searching her eyes for anger, for pain, for anything. But she gave him nothing, not even a flicker. When the baby finally arrived, a healthy baby boy, Katherine held him gently, feeling a brief sting of heartbreak. This child was proof of Jonathan's betrayal, yet he was innocent. She cleaned him, wrapped him, and handed him to Emily with grace. Emily cried tears of joy. Jonathan cried too, but for a very different reason. The room felt heavy with unspoken truth, and Katherine knew the time had come. She removed her gloves slowly, ready for the final confrontation. The moment Emily was stable and resting, Katherine asked Jonathan to step outside. Her voice was calm, too calm. Jonathan followed her out into the hallway, like a condemned man, walking to judgment. Katherine handed him a neatly prepared envelope. "These are divorce papers," she said softly. "I've known about you and Emily for months." Jonathan's knees nearly buckled. He opened his mouth to speak, but Katherine raised a hand to silence him. "Save it. You made your choices. This is mine." Jonathan tried to apologize, stuttering through excuses and regret, but Katherine didn't waver. She reminded him of every lie, every late night, every moment he chose someone else over his own wife. He broke down, but she remained composed. She had already cried all her tears in private months ago. Now, she simply reclaimed her dignity. She left him standing in the corridor, clutching the papers, broken and exposed. When Jonathan returned to Emily's room, his face pale and shaken, Emily immediately sensed something was wrong. It didn't take long before a nurse innocently mentioned that the senior midwife, Katherine Moore, was Jonathan's legal wife. Emily's eyes widened in horror, the truth hitting her like a storm. Jonathan tried to justify himself, claiming he planned to tell her, but Emily wasn't fooled. She realized he had lied to her just as much as he had lied to Katherine. Emily, emotional from childbirth and furious at being dragged into deception, told Jonathan to leave. She refused to let a man capable of such betrayal stay near her or her child. Jonathan begged, pleaded, tried to explain, but Emily was done. She demanded space, clarity, and honesty, things he had never given her. Jonathan walked out of the room alone, the reality of his shattered double life finally settling on his shoulders. Katherine walked out of the hospital that night, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and liberation. For the first time in months, she wasn't pretending. She wasn't holding back tears. She wasn't waiting for a confession from a man who would never give one. She confronted everything with strength and grace, and now she was finally free from the weight of betrayal. The cool night air felt like a new beginning. She returned to her apartment and began packing essentials. She didn't want a house she shared with Jonathan. She didn't want memories soaked in lies. She wanted a clean slate. As she looked at her reflection in the mirror, she saw not a heartbroken wife, but a woman reborn. Katherine Moore had walked through betrayal with dignity, and now she was ready to rebuild her life from the ground up. Jonathan spent the next few days spiraling. Emily refused to see him, insisting she needed time alone with the baby. Katherine had served him divorce papers without a single tear, and that silence was louder than any argument she could have thrown at him. Jonathan walked to their empty home, touching the furniture, the photos, the spaces Katherine once filled with warmth. For the first time, he felt the true weight of what he had done. Not just losing a wife, but losing a life built on trust he had destroyed with his own hands. Every corner reminded him of Katherine's calm voice, her gentle routines, her quiet devotion. Now all he had were echoes and regret. He replayed the moment he saw her in the labor room, her eyes cold, her professionalism flawless, as she delivered the child that ended their marriage. The realization hit him hard. Katherine's silence wasn't weakness. It was strength, and she had used that strength to walk away from him forever. Emily eventually allowed Jonathan to visit, but only for a short conversation. She held her newborn son protectively as she stared at Jonathan with disappointment. She told him she felt betrayed, not just because he lied about Katherine, but because he made her part of a scandal she never asked for. Emily hadn't expected to become the center of a marriage's collapse. She had believed Jonathan's lies, that Katherine was cold, distant, or uninterested in him. Now she knew the truth. He twisted stories to justify his selfishness. Jonathan apologized, but Emily wasn't moved. She told him that if he could lie so easily to his wife of many years, he could lie to her just as easily. She didn't want a relationship built on deceit. Her focus would be her child, not a man who shattered two lives. She asked him to leave her home for good. Jonathan left, humiliated, realizing that his choices had cost him both women. Katherine embraced her new routine with surprising ease. She rented a small but peaceful flat overlooking a quiet street, choosing simplicity over memories. Her colleagues at the hospital noticed she seemed lighter, more focused, almost reborn. She spent her evenings reading, taking long walks, and rediscovering parts of herself she had lost in the emotional weight of her failing marriage. For the first time in years, she could breathe without wondering where Jonathan was or who he was with. She didn't seek revenge, nor did she dwell on the past. She simply allowed herself to heal. When old friends reached out, surprised by the divorce news, she spoke calmly, explaining only what was necessary. She protected her peace. Katherine knew her worth. She had delivered Jonathan's child with dignity and walked away with even more. And though the betrayal hurt, it no longer defined her. Desperate and alone, Jonathan attempted to rebuild what he broke, starting with therapy and long letters to Katherine he never sent. He tried reaching out to her once, asking for a chance to talk, but she politely declined. She didn't need explanations. She'd already seen his truth. Jonathan respected her decision, feeling the consequences of his actions tighten around him like a chain. Nights were the hardest, when silence magnified his guilt. He also tried repairing his connection with Emily, hoping they could at least co-parent peacefully. But Emily remained distant. She promised to allow him to see his child under boundaries, but nothing more. Jonathan realized he had destroyed every meaningful relationship in his life. And while he tried to change, he understood that some losses were permanent, especially when the person you hurt had already stepped into a new chapter you no longer belonged to. Katherine continued embracing independence with newfound confidence. She joined a midwife support network, started teaching maternity classes, and quickly became admired for her calm expertise. Patients trusted her instantly, and young midwives often sought her guidance. She poured her energy into helping mothers feel safe as she once wished to feel in her own marriage. Her work became both healing and empowering. During a hospital seminar, she delivered a talk on emotional resilience in maternity care, receiving standing applause. That evening, as she walked home in the crisp evening breeze, she smiled genuinely for the first time in what felt like forever. The pain of betrayal had reshaped her, not into a bitter woman, but into a stronger one, someone capable of rebuilding her world without hesitation. Katherine was no longer Jonathan's abandoned wife. She was a woman rising from ashes. Emily's early days of motherhood were overwhelming. Between sleepless nights and breastfeeding challenges, she found herself reflecting deeply. She remembered how Katherine had delivered her baby, with calmness, professionalism, and strength, despite knowing the truth. Emily began to admire Katherine, even feeling grateful for her compassion. Slowly, bitterness toward Jonathan faded, replaced by determination to build a stable life for herself and her son. She began therapy, confronting her choices, acknowledging her own role in the chaos. She didn't forgive Jonathan, but she forgave herself. Emily reached out to Katherine through a handwritten letter, not to apologize, but to thank her for her humanity during the most vulnerable moment of her life. Katherine read the letter with quiet acceptance, appreciating Emily's courage. It was a chapter closed in peace, not conflict. Jonathan's life grew painfully quiet. The home he once shared with Katherine felt like a museum of memories, cold, hollow, and filled with regret. He spent nights walking through the empty halls, touching frames that once held laughter, and sitting alone on the sofa where Katherine used to rest her head on his shoulder. He understood now that losing someone like Katherine wasn't temporary. It was permanent. He visited his son regularly, but never stayed long. Emily kept their interactions civil, nothing more. Jonathan tried to find joy in fatherhood, but every time he held the baby, he remembered the moment Katherine delivered him, Jonathan trembling in a corner while she stood strong. It haunted him. He realized he had lost the one person who loved him unconditionally. He had no choice but to live with that truth. Katherine wasn't looking for love, but happiness found her in unexpected ways. She reconnected with an old university friend, Daniel Hayes, now a pediatrician at a nearby clinic. Their conversations were warm and effortless, filled with shared memories and quiet laughter. Daniel admired her strength, and Katherine appreciated sincerity, something she hadn't felt in years. They didn't rush anything. They simply enjoyed each other's company. One evening, after a long shift, Daniel surprised her with a small bouquet and an invitation to dinner. Katherine hesitated for a moment, then accepted. The dinner was simple but meaningful. For the first time, she felt a spark, gentle, hopeful, nothing like the fragile love she once carried for Jonathan. It wasn't a replacement, it was renewal. She left the restaurant smiling softly, her heart lighter than it had been in a long time. As months passed, Katherine flourished. Her relationship with Daniel grew naturally, built on trust and mutual respect. She didn't define it too quickly. She simply let it bloom. At work, she was promoted to senior clinical educator, a position that allowed her to teach, supervise, and shape the next generation of midwives. It was a dream she once thought impossible, while living under the emotional weight of a broken marriage. Jonathan heard about her successes through mutual acquaintances. Each update pierced him softly, a reminder of the life he could have cherished if he hadn't chosen deceit. But Katherine wasn't thinking of him anymore. Her world was expanding, brighter and more peaceful than he ever allowed it to be. She had stepped into a future he no longer had access to. Katherine stood in her new apartment one morning, sunlight pouring through the window as she prepared for another beautiful day. Her life now felt whole, balanced, peaceful, and filled with opportunities she never had the space to explore before. Jonathan was a distant memory, his betrayal no longer controlling her spirit. Emily found her own strength as a mother. Jonathan lived with the consequences of his choices. And Katherine? She rose above them all. As she walked out her door, she met Daniel waiting downstairs with coffee in hand and warmth in his smile. Katherine felt gratitude, not for what she lost, but for what she gained. Her journey through betrayal had led her to rediscover herself. She was no longer a woman broken by her husband's lies. She was Katherine Moore, strong, free, and standing in the first day of the life she truly deserved. That's all for today. Like, subscribe, and see you in the next episode. Stay tuned.